you and me, so by all means, say everything you can. What we're going to be looking at is, oops, it's all gone. We're going to be looking at our story tonight. We've done introductions to my story, your story, and the story, and they're all up on the YouTube. You there?
Yeah, I just might.
You there? All right. I'll talk.
Yeah, better. Yeah, I've taken the earphones out. I don't think there's anyone who's going to be bothered.
Right then. So I want to run through our story, and so that you're acquainted with it. It's a different animal to my story and your story, which are more pastoral and heartfelt in their responses. Our story, like the story, requires more knowledge. And there are different ways to run our story, and like all of them. But our story runs best as an informational study. And I've got some of these things. Part 2 of our story is on short video talks, and I'll come to that in a sec. Part 1, we haven't done that on video talks. We're just relying on you to do it with internet connection. Okay, so you can do this. I think our story would be very good for Christians to do, but it's also very good for staff in a Christian school or agency who don't have a church connection.
Oh, yeah. Mm.
Revolutionary, really. And some of the bits that are in it you wouldn't do with them. So, for instance, in the very first of our story, there's a Bible study part. And you've got to say, now, would that be good for them to do, this particular group, or not? Just because it's a Bible study doesn't mean to say it's not good for non-Christians to do. In fact, it's probably the first time they've ever opened their Bibles. But you know what I mean? It can actually be a thing, oh, no, that might be a step too far. I'll just ask them, do you want to do it? Do you want to read some bits of the Bible on this? And so on. Okay, so that's the overall view. And the idea is that it fits into a context where unless we speak positively about the church's role, positively and honestly about the church's role, the only information people will have is that which comes through the media, because they don't have direct experience. Or the public experience they see is the unfortunate one.
Yeah.
Right? The impersonal. So that's what we're going to do. Can you see the screen called Our Story on your screen?
Yep, and I have the copy in front of me.
Oh, good. Well, we'll walk through it. But on the front there, it's got an ancient illuminated text. And we'll come back to that in the second part of this. But the first part is 5 studies on what's Christianity. And the second half is called What's Christianity Ever Done For Us, which has been released under a different title called Wicked. WXED, What's Christianity Ever Done? And we'll come back to that second half in a sec. Okay, so you can run just the second part, you can do the first part, or you can do one after the other, well, it doesn't really matter. I hope I'm not giving too much flexibility all the time, but so given that people have disinformation, this will help them get good, honest stories. So anyway, the leadership stuff you can read, and there's a few book references I'm giving on page, whatever page 5 is, and but they're just one of many, really. I wouldn't say they're the best things on the subject, but do follow these outlines, because there's a very simplicity of them is what's captivating. I've seen somebody try to write this. Look, what's Christianity for, intelligent inquirers? And they ended up writing something which is more about what's my denomination compared to all the other denominations. What's the uniting church ethos, which is a document that we put out to people who come to work with our agencies and schools. But if somebody read that who had no church connection, they wouldn't know what they were talking about. A couple of years ago, when Osama bin Laden was assassinated and his body dumped without burial by the Americans, it's an immoral act. And I went along to a international Muslim gathering at my university, where I was then a chaplain, and brought along some published documents by lots of churches, including my own, apologising for such a heinous act, such an immoral thing. And compared to what was being said on the media, which was, those odd and maverick, accountable to no one Christian speakers who say how wonderful it was that Osama bin Laden was dead and that his body was buried at sea without proper rites. And those were put on the media. And so I went along with a much more reliable report at what the churches actually thought. Well, blow me down at the end of the meeting, having just presented these documents to the two international speakers who were studying academics. Somebody came up to me at the end and said how wonderful that the churches were here. Notice I'm just a chaplain at the university, but they didn't see me as different from anybody else in any other church at all. That's where they're coming from. People don't see any distinction between from the inside people see so much of, and we often still are too complicated when we think we're being simple. So this is an attempt to be extra complicated, extra uncomplicated. So I hope you enjoy the excursion. I hope I haven't fallen somehow short on that. So the first study is it takes a whole village to raise one child. It's said to be an African statement, but notice. So there's a number of steps in this, a number of exercises. And what we want to do here is to appreciate the value of the local church among their neighbours and to understand that the local church is the primary definition of what it means to be the church. So I've got a picture of a local church on the front, and there's many more come as we go through. And it draws a distinction between, power figures in funny hats walking down corridors in enormous old buildings. That's not the church, guys. It's the local people who are the church. And once you focus there, suddenly you understand an awful lot about what Christian community is, in fact. So the first exercise is just a startup question to ask people to share what they think a real Christian is. It doesn't really matter what their answers are, and you don't have to defend anything when they say it. But I find most people actually come up with a pretty honest, fairly right definition. And there's some odd bits to it, like people who don't swear, but most of the people go, oh, no, it doesn't matter if they do. Or, in a group setting, it's all right, Someone who doesn't drink and who's a wowzer. And other people say, oh, look, I've got an uncle who's a really great guy. I mean, he has a glass of wine at Christmas. No, that's not right. He's a real Christian. I can vouch for him. And so on. People have these kinds of conversations. In the end, they all come to something pretty right. And if they all talk about behaviour without the internal meaning of it, you can just say, what about the meaning of it to them? It's obviously religious. You haven't talked about that. And just like it's just an opening discussion. But it's interesting to see where people are coming from. The second exercise, therefore, is how does a church love one another? Okay? Most important thing about Jesus, and they'll almost all say love your neighbour, if they know anything at all. So the exercise distributes some New Testament passages, and you can give them out to, a few verses to this part of the group, a few verses to that part of the group, a few verses to that part of the group, get them all working at the same time, and then get them to come back and say, well, what does it say? What describes Christians loving one another? What would it look like in practice? And if you stop for a second, have you ever seen that?
Yeah.
And most people have. I've had some really surprising conversations around that question. And you don't have them often at the beginning, but this is so you've got to earn some trust. There's a prayer there if you want to use it. The third exercise in the third step in the first exercise is it takes a whole village, and there's a plus and a minus sign. What's been your best and worst experience of a local church? That's your startup. That's the plus and minus. And then there's an article where I talk about my experience of church. And, people can say, well, that's not my experience of church. He's obviously had a privileged life all his life and he's never had anything go wrong with him. Couldn't be further from the truth, because the article actually talks about some real terrible times we've been through, like everybody. Then the fourth step is how does a church respond to neighbourhood need? And it starts to classify them. And there was you'll find some people are more interested in this than others. It's clearly more interesting to agencies than schools or sometimes even local churches. So then it goes on to what's Christian about an agency? What's a faith-based agency? And then it makes a statement about uniting care, which it picks up just as an example, which talks about the number of things that we do. And then the next step in that is why is it so? And it talks about the story of the Good Samaritan. Yeah. And that's happened in another one of the exercises as well. And you just ask people to read it. It's in the text. And what's the main points of the story? Jesus' affirmations here include, and the first one's the most important one, having a religion can make you feel self-important. Instead, interrupt your own agenda to love your neighbour, and that's what real Christianity is. And so how do things like that spark up? How does the, real self-giving, looking after everyone in the village stuff spark up? Again, it's good for schools and agencies to talk about. And then it talks about, I'm calling the problem of distance, which most people think is geographical distance, but I'm on page 15 if you're not with me yet.
Yeah.
And this is the distance between words and deeds. Okay? Because all of the major denominations have set up agencies like Tender Care, Anglicare, Uniting Care, Baptist Care, which are about doing the deeds professionally and accountably and well, and they're separated from the congregations. And while there's some good things about that, there's some bad things about that. That is the distance now between words and deeds. Because now a congregation doesn't have the deeds to say, well, actually, we really do what Jesus said. We earn our cred by our, everybody knows you've got to live it before you speak it. All right, everybody knows that. But then the people doing the deeds don't want to say anything. So we've separated words and deeds, and we need to actually bring them back together again. And that is actually happening in my church, but it may not be happening in all of them. Okay, then I've made some suggestions about that. And then the last question, who is my neighbour? This is getting down to the nitty-gritty, isn't it, of implications for people who are doing this workshop. So in my village, who is my neighbour, is where you finish. The conclusion, the local church is it. And the local church has to be doing it, really doing it, not just pretending, and not just delegating it to some professional person whose salary they somehow raised or they scrounged together from government grants. So, any questions about the first step in Makes You Wonder Our Story? It takes a whole village.
Yeah, no, I think this thing about distance is quite important. The local churches find it really difficult to, you start something off and then it becomes professionalised and removed without necessarily the consent or the wish of the congregation.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right. But we've done that repeatedly. If you think of our track record in hospitals and schools, they've all become secular.
Yeah. I mean, we have to be
a pattern.
And it's the society we live in as much as anything.
Yeah. But it's also the good works we do. We do it so well. We create a model. We do it at our own cost, and suddenly people go, "Gee, that's good. Gee, I like that. Let's keep doing that." And off it goes. It becomes somebody else's.
Or it has to go through government regulations and of health and safety. And
that's sort of in the middle ground, isn't it? And it loses its way, and then they need to come back and ask us to re-inject.
It's not necessarily the fault of the congregation that they don't have much hands-on mission in that way.
I agree. I think it is a dilemma. I think we have this separation, and we really have to do something about it. And I was talking with someone who's involved in this and trying to do some study on it. And we figured out that one of these four things needs to happen. I'll just mention this. One is the church needs to say to these agencies and schools, can we boast in publicity that you are doing this good work, education or agency work, in the name of Jesus for us? Can we do that? Can we actually go public and say we're really proud of you? And your inspiration derives from Jesus, And if you don't like that, then maybe you should sever your association. But if you think that's reasonable, then tell us, what are the limits on that? We don't want to spoil your work. We don't want people to think that when they go to these things they're going to get Bible bashed either. So, we don't want that. So what would it be? And we'll have that conversation. I think that would be a good thing to do. But another good thing to do would be to say, why don't you actually get your staff investigating some of their own spirituality so that we're not somehow seen as divorced from each other. There are many ways to do that. And a third thing to do, well, can the chaplains who are involved in that actually share their faith or strengthen people, give them strength from the faith of the staff? Sometimes people who don't actually realise they've got a faith. Can you just let them do it with good guidance, like what I call let us learn what valid faith sharing is, not outlaw it all because we're afraid that invalid faith sharing will take place. Okay, so that's the third thing. And the last is, get some of these agencies and schools which have immense resources, much more even than the congregations. Can they actually help the congregations to do their work with media or with money or skills in kind, community development and so on? So there are many ways back into relationship, I think, and I think that's being explored by some. Anyway, let's go on to the second study, the family tree of Christianity. Now, most of us have got, in our extended families, we've got people whose ethnicity is different background to our own. We've got a few in mind. It's really fascinating. But the church is like any multicultural family. People sometimes say to me, like, my son married a Nepalese, my daughter married an Iranian, my husband's family are from Italy, my family are from America, and we even like New Zealanders, or something, like lots of families are like this. And so this attempts to describe the main Christian movements across history as a multicultural family. Okay? So it's a brief history lesson, and it's using the tree and the roots of the tree. It starts off being Jewish, and then it becomes a number of other things, and then you find as you get further and further out into the canopy, all of the categories mix up. We'll come back to that. So it starts off we're on page 19, I think it is. Christianity began as a Jewish movement. Then it talks about, and there's a YouTube clip you can watch there. It just describes that. It's only 3 minutes long. And then there's a few discussion questions. And then it spreads further out into the world. And this part covers quite a bit of history. But from the very early days, Christianity became Jewish and non-Jewish together and went to many ethnic groups, and then suffered a great deal of persecution, then became legal. And then it gives a short account of, the great era of Christendom, which lasted 1,000 years. But there's a whole lot of YouTube clips there about the Eastern Church, the Western Church. The Orthodox Church is unknown to most. That was the great flowering of the Christian Church, called the Byzantine Empire. So that's given some YouTube clips about that. But then back in the West, after the rise of Islam in the East, a lot of those monks and stuff that started so many wonderful things in the East moved back to the West, and we had the Renaissance and the Reformation, and there's a whole lot of YouTube clips on the Reformation. And then up to the 20th century, the great outbreak was the Protestant breakaway from Catholics meant the multiplication of different kinds of denominations. Kind of went free market there for a while, and still is. And then you get, then a different sort of trend, the Pentecostal or charismatic groups. So a couple of YouTube clips on early Pentecostalism, and it's kind of a miraculous thing. Then what happened after the war. There's a whole lot of history missing here. And today, on section 5, everything is mixing. Everything is mixing. Everything has gone global. So you get Catholics in Japan. I once met a Greek Orthodox guy from Korea. And you get Protestants in Russia, and just as you get Buddhists and Muslims in this country, so you get Christians and all the others. So those maps that say, this country's this sort of religion, this country's that sort of religion, can all be taken with more than a pinch of salt. Everybody's mixing up. And I know there are still some places where, particularly Islamic countries, frankly, where Christianity is outlawed and everything else is outlawed as well, except in certain little enclaves, guest worker enclaves. But by and large, wherever Christianity has gone, it has given permission for other religions to be protected. There have been some terrible exceptions to this. But there, where Christians have set out actually to persecute particularly Jewish people and sometimes Muslims. But those are exceptions, and they are departures from Jesus' teaching. He was, in fact, Jewish, so no way he's going to persecute his mother. Okay? Today you have all kinds of churches, and it gives lists of all kinds of different house churches, movement between different religions, new kinds of churches in the two-thirds world. Some churches that were originally separate and formed union churches, like the Uniting Church, and so on. So now all this kind of mixing up is going on all over the world. And that's the family tree. We're now, like most families, sitting around with a very multicultural family. And it is pretty interesting. Now notice this is a huge family of local churches. Again, if you look at the executive board or the row of bishops of any one church, you probably find they're all male. Most of them are male. They're not all male. So that's not where the mixture is. The mixture is at the grassroots where the church really lives, and that's really exciting. That's really exciting. When I go to a church now, and their faces are all like mine, I feel creepy. I think something's gone wrong here. Something's gone terribly wrong. Don't they know how wonderfully multicultural this church is? And then I go looking for a church that's got every kind of face in it, like I'm used to. Okay. Now that's the next session. We'll go to session 3 when you've got a question. Got any question about the family tree of the church, Ruth?
No.
So do you think you'd be able to teach that with your knowledge of church history?
Oh, yeah? Yep.
Yeah, I think you would. I think it's too hard. Follow the notes, make it up. Make it your own.
Yep.
And I've given you some YouTube clips there, which are lots of little 2 and 3 minute clips. So some of the bits that are not well known, you can just click on them and show them to people, or get them to look at them in homework and come ready to have a chat. They're all short, but I've picked good ones where they exist.
Well, that's really helpful, that you've done that.
Yeah. So if the links are broken, you better tell me, because sometimes people pull down things. Anyway, number 3 is how the church got its Bible. And that's to unpack the way the Bible acts as a form of authority in the church. Particularly the people often object to the word literalist from outside the church. And this series of studies is destined mostly for people outside the church, as I've said. So the question of what's a literalist? Well, I don't even know what they mean by that. So let's talk about the book. What is this book? People don't even know what they're talking about. So what is the Bible about? And so it's got a couple of websites there, the Bible in 1 minute, or a little Bible overview, which is a bit breathtaking. And then I won't go to authors who wrote the Bible and where they came from, how the Bible has been translated and transmitted through the centuries. There's a little graph there about how wonderful and how thousands of copies of the pieces of the New Testament have become available to us. So that it is certainly the most reliable ancient document in any language and in any culture by a factor of many hundreds. And then it goes on to, that translation work is still going on. We're not even close to translating into all the languages of the world. And then we go to what I call the libraries, the Old Testament and the New Testament, and then just sort of saying what's in it. And for the people of scientific bent, I put a graph of the books of the Bible, which look like a scientific periodic table. I just pinched it from the net. That's pretty fun thing to do. And the colours give the coding for what the different kinds of literature there are in this library, and so on. So it's just a nice little graph, really. And it puts them in a kind of a sequence. It basically says, look, there's a hierarchy of things you want to read here. Like Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Acts is the top of the wazoo. That's the really definitive stuff. And anything that doesn't agree with what Jesus teaches in those, well, you don't take too seriously. Everything is a before and after, trying to live it out before and then after. And so you'd go probably from the New Testament to those Gospels and Acts, then you'd go to the New Testament books on the right, and they'd be the next in order of importance and authority. And then you go back to its background, all the other books on the left, and they'd be next, I think. And you get a problem if you elevate the secondary texts of the New Testament above the Gospels, even though they were written earlier in written form. They're not more important than Jesus' teachings. So that's what that bit says. And it just invites you to look at some of the different texts and see how different they are. So then step 4 in this exercise is how did the text become the Bible? And it just goes through a few quotes about that. There's nothing contentious or difficult about it. It just gives what's pretty much the standard line, and which most people don't know, even though they disagree with it. But then it asks, look, what do we mean by inspiration? Well, it's the church that decided these books were always inspiring in unique ways. And there is this question of, well, what if we didn't have a canon? What if stuff that people were writing now that inspired people now, what if that was taken of, what if we were adrift on the fashions of history? Is the next question. What if we didn't have, the originals to go back to all the time? Or, that we would be.
Well, I actually reckon we probably didn't do ourselves a great favour by closing off the canon then, as if God stopped speaking then.
There's
been a lot of inspirational stuff written since. That
and we read those books and we quote them and we study them, but we've put a line down, and at some point people have said, look, that was the end of inspiration, that's it. But I think the fence is actually different from that. I think we acknowledge lots of God moments, like Martin Luther King Jr. and Dietrich Bonhoeffer and, Augustine and, Cyril and Methodius and, Hildegard of Bingen, people men and women who've been absolute inspirations throughout history and right through to today. I don't object to the fact that people get canonised because it sort of recognise that. But we're saying the original story is this, and we need to stay anchored to it. So I think that's a bit less than what some people say, but there we are. Anyway, it's a good discussion to have. People don't have to agree in this discussion. They just have to see that there's a range of opinions and that there's some reasonable things. So how do we read the Bible? Let's just sort of unpack some of the different texts, and then there's a conclusion. But on the blog site, you'll find there's a thing which says, what about all the violent passages in the Bible? And it actually, quotes, one of these things that was put on the web and unpacks it. But fits, first of all, into the frame I've just described. Well, a lot of that stuff, was historical background way before Jesus, so we don't have to subscribe to it as Christians at all, because Jesus clearly spoke about that sort of stuff in negative terms. But on the other hand, it is in the Bible, so what do we want to say about that? So it's just an option. If that comes up, then you've got something on the blog site, MYW3.wordpress, that you can go and have a look at. Number 4, the streams of spirituality. And it gives how to understand access the main streams of spiritual renewal, because sometimes the local church can be a bit frustrating because it's in a stream that you don't relate to. So there are 3 starting points. One is religiosity is what influences us. It's not just going to church, and there's some websites and some discussion. The phrase, I'm spiritual but not religious. And then religion's all the same. Again, some blog sites and some discussion. And then it opens up, what are the streams? And the streams I'm suggesting, and each of these has, a picture and some blog sites, some website things to look up and discuss. One is charismatic or Pentecostal stream. Second, the creation spirituality stream. Third, mysticism. Fourth, contemplation. Those two are not the same. Fifth, the reformed or Puritan stream. Sixth is the evangelical stream. Seventh is fundamentalism. And 8 is sacramental. There you go. 8 streams. Okay, and sometimes people are a mixture of these, but it's just worth isolating what the streams are, and they all form one river, the one river of the Spirit. And I've loved all of them at some point. And there's a place for all of them, frankly, even the fundamentalist one. So, and then it talks about conversion, some examples of conversion between Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, and what does that look like? And then there's an article about doubt. What is doubt and how good is it? There's a great quote there. Okay, and how welcome is it to entertain your doubt? So that's what it means about the streams of spirituality. Progress in, and sometimes move between, and conversion and doubt and the different streams are all in some mixture of working our way forwards and through our journey in some way. Okay, so that's what the conclusion is. To move to an owned faith, one must be invited to ask questions, express doubts, reframe your early learning, integrate news from other disciplines into your everyday faith and practice. It requires that there's someone you can trust to respect your quest. And that's the conclusion. If your church doesn't provide these, go to one that does.
Yeah.
Okay? And, you know, I've given there's lots to do, I know that.
Yep.
And the last part of part one of this is global Christianity. And it just starts to explore some of the signs of Christianity, its international form. And that's because most people say, oh, look, religions are crap. You know, you shouldn't be missionising anybody. So we go through something of what global Christianity is. Notice we've already earlier on talked about Christianity is in all the world. And this one brings it out more explicitly. So it brings it up with this question, was Jesus a white man? Well, some people have got no answer to that because those are all the images they've ever seen. And but there's a couple of little YouTube clips there. Particularly one of 3D graphics reconstructing a possible likeness and so on. Anyway, then there's a video about spread religions across the globe. I mentioned that earlier, and here it is. Christianity and colonialism is a big issue, and there's some video clips and some, you know, let's recognise that missionaries were both compromised and committed. And what research has shown out of that collision, there's two opposite trajectories. They were compromised to do bad things and they were committed to doing good things. Recent research has shown, and I've given you a couple of references to it there, what some of the long-term effects of missionary work were. I've given some examples, lots of YouTube clips from India, Asia, Africa, and indigenous people, and then talk about what the Christian mission in the world actually is, using a chapter from Luke 4. Okay? Oh, and there's an article about contemporary Christianity, which is Anglican in Victoria, which is really terrific. In conclusion, in the shadow of pain and injustice, Christianity sheds light by being global, respectful, missional and local. Christianity must also repent of errors and abuses, be more open to their own cultural blindfolds and restore harms done. Okay?
Yep.
But it does say that this impulse is very important. Somebody said to me once, when they went to their own religion, group, they weren't very friendly. Whenever they go to church, they're always welcome. And I said, well, that's probably because Christianity is missional. They really do want to welcome everybody. And if they weren't missional, they probably wouldn't care. They wouldn't care enough anyway. And caring enough is probably the theme of our story. Okay, so conclusion of part A, what's Christianity? And there's some other going further things on the blog site. So, okay, you ready to go to the second half? This will be shorter. Okay, the second half is what's Christianity ever done for us? And here it is. For science, for arts and architecture, for education, for healthcare and for the law. Okay, I'm dedicating our story to Brian Hill, by the way, Mr. Frank, from your state. Because he's done incredible work in all this. Now,
he's still alive. He hasn't died, has he?
No, he's in his 80s.
Oh, wow.
Every now and then he has another doctoral student. And it's given you some references there. And what you find is, here's one thing here, the What's Christianity for Science. And again, it's a small group study book. You won't get this done in one session. Right? And so although I claim this is only 5 studies, in fact, each of these is a bit of a series. But when you think about it, almost nobody wants to do all these studies because they just don't have the background. So you just do the ones that your group is interested in.
Oh, yeah. Are they?
Okay? And if you find that they want to do them all, then you may need to split the group. So, okay, well, you can do that one and you can do that one, and we'll come together and talk about what we've learned at the end of the night. So they can still meet at the same house. You know, one meets around the dining table, one meets around the coffee table, and they can talk together at the end of the night of what they've discovered. And you can still do it. You know, 2 different ones at one night, or 3, depending on where you are. So all of them follow a similar pattern. One is respect for that profession, because Christians have made wonderful contributions to that field throughout Christian history. Okay, so there have been persons of faith who have been pioneers of, science, healthcare, arts, and so on. And it demonstrates this throughout history. It names them and often pulls a quote from them to demonstrate that we really mean it when we say they were people of genuine faith. The second, not just the persons of faith, but now the principles of faith are also important in the formation of this field. So for science, for instance, one of the principles of Christian faith that has made Christians so interested in developing science from way back is you do not subscribe to tradition, you subscribe to the truth. We are committed to what is the truth, not to what is the tradition. And so Christians have been pioneers in experimental science. Okay, going right back to the 9th century and before, some say. The third thing is there are problems. So we've got pioneers, principles, and now problems. Sometimes because of the Christian strength in a field, we have made a mess of it. And that happens in every field. Sometimes it's an atrocious abomination and a disgrace. More than a disgrace, it's a crime, what the Christians got up to in the name of their God. You can always trace down that they did it. They might have done it in the name of Christ, but they did it only by opposing the truth of Christ. And you almost always find there were other Christians at the time opposing them. Right?
Yep.
So for instance, when William Wilberforce is outlawing slavery, there were a lot of Christians opposing him. Okay, so he's a person of great principle and a great pioneer in a field of law, but there were some people carrying out an abomination, that is, trying to ensure that slavery continued. So we need to apologise for those problems. And the last part is, what's the future? What's the potential for the future? All of these disciplines now are showing cracks as Christianity has been sidelined from the public square, probably now for over 100 years, of increasing distance from being accepted. And probably toadying up, I think Christianity lost its way a century ago with these things. So there are cracks of immersion in these disciplines which show that the original inspiration that came from the other 3 Ps is in need of being revisited. Not so that Christianity can own it again and therefore do disasters, but so that we can now take our proper place in the dialogue. So the Christian should have a voice again, but not a veto.
Yeah.
Okay?
Have you read that thing that If Darwin Prayed by Bruce Sanguine? It's a lovely.
No, I haven't.
Book. It's this thought that, supposing Darwin's church had embraced his discoveries as, opening up God's unfolding of the universe, and instead of being paranoid about the fact that maybe the universe or the creation wasn't fixed, what a difference our whole history might have been.
Yes. Yeah. It's interesting that, in fact, most Christians at the time did accept it. One of his main colleagues was a strong Christian, like one of his colleagues in the field, and the field of geology, which preceded him and which gave him the time frame of the world, was a field pioneered by Christians. So the fact that this kind of young earth creationism got up is the aberration that has continued and become popular in certain parts of the world only.
Yeah. I've noticed that his wife was petrified that he'd rotten hell because he questioned whether creation was fixed. Yeah, and I thought, it could have been different if they'd had the louder voice. Yeah, the ones who accepted it.
Yeah. Well, today,
embraced it.
The majority of Christians accept the long earth, the long history period, and don't really mind how God did it. That's a scientific question. It's still God's work, and all we've got to do is work out what we mean when we say God is present and active in the world, and that's all that needs to be done. But and people often reduce that to childishness, but that's all that needs to be done. So, but what this does is, and there's another study that's referenced on the blog site for this, which starts to run through Nobel Prize winners who are Christians. In other words, people in the last century, which is the only period Nobel Prizes have been awarded. Those who are sincere believers, I know there's a site which says those who are Jewish, but a lot of Jewish people are only ethnically Jewish, they're not religious. So that's more ambiguous. I've only gone for Christians who are, counted by this particular website to be genuinely, personally Christian in an era when Christianity was being sidelined from and how many Nobel Prize winners there are. And then there's another series of things which give profiles right back to the 9th century of Christians and Muslims being singularly important in the growth and pioneering, in fact, not conforming thinkers, but actually pioneer thinkers. Those are other resources you can get. Sorry?
Which is that website that goes through the
you'll
Nobel
find
Prize winners?
The best place to go is maxdoubt.wordpress.
All right. Yeah.
maxdoubt.wordpress, all one word. Maxdoubt, all one word, .wordpress.com, and you'll find it there under evidence from science. So that's a whole lot of profiles are there. And it's also under MYW3.wordpress. Okay, so I'm trying to give, a number of different situations. Oops, you've gone. You back, Ruth? Can't hear you. If you're there, I can't hear you. You back?
Yep.
Okay, good. Okay.
I don't know what happened there.
No,
it says my internet connection is unstable. Alex3.
Okay, so we're back to going through. I'm saying that in science, Christianity and science like an old married couple. I'm giving a whole lot of quotes from here. So I'm just going to scoot through. Science is awesome. Does faith weaken science? No. Faith persons, here's some profiles of people who've been pioneers of faith. We talk about Galileo. There's an article you can get to about that trial. And right through to the modern era, were they just conforming? No, clearly not if you actually look at their life. And facing the future challenges. So those are the 3 steps. Then how do you describe Christianity in scientific terms? Then the ending. Then you get to arts and architecture. It has the same structure to it. It goes a bit differently. Humans have always made art, and Christians' principles have always come up with art. Then it does a bit of a history through Christian art, the earliest Christian art. As soon as it became legal, we started with books and icons. And then when we earned some property, we went to mosaics, which are just absolutely captivating. But we were also doing caves. Then we went to Roman Basilica as a public meeting, Celtic villages, which had no power whatsoever. And then the great Christian Empire and the great Hagia Sophia, how that continued through history. Christian history and Muslim history took up the Church of Hagia Sophia as their design, right through to the Taj Mahal. And then we're still going on all this magnificent art. It goes through to the Renaissance, the Oops, unstable. And then it goes through to the magnificence of the Gothic Renaissance, and then through to music. Then what's called the Renaissance.
Okay, back again.
Okay, welcome back. I'm just saying, as you go through the arts, the Christianity and the arts, there have been 3 or 4 Renaissances, not just the one that we call the Renaissance that is pictured here. And each time it's come from some fresh discovery of not just the glory of God, but also the glory of the human made in the image of God. And those two things together make for a Renaissance. And then we pick on some Christian people, Dürer, Rembrandt, and then Vincent van Gogh and his Christianity. And then in recent times, two, unfortunately, just passed away. Sam Hopewell, in Western Australia, naive artist, and then no relative of mine, William Robinson in Queensland, a Christian who's an Archibald Prize winner, whose landscape painting is, he says, is a Christian act. And then some contemporary art prizes. So the story of modern architecture is not as good as it has been for some, but then other people are saying, well, maybe we're just reinventing and doing some new things. But there's a renewed interest into the theology of beauty. And it's we're not inventing it, we're recovering it, the sense of beauty that there was in Plato and the early doctrines of creation. But then there's three apologies to make, as with all the other things. Particularly iconoclasm, when Christians actually set out to destroy works of art. And I think I'm going to edit this text because there's actually a fifth iconoclasm, where we destroyed sacred art. And that was the colonial era in Australia and some other nations.
Oh, yes, yeah.
We destroyed so much sacred art of Indigenous peoples that it should be called an iconoclasm.
Yeah.
Okay. So then, conclusion to that, then we go to what's Christianity done for education. And the same thing there, what we did in public education is absolutely fantastic. And it's a much longer and earlier story for public universal education than we goes way, way back. Then the origin of universities in the Christian libraries. There were some other universities from Islamic Morocco and Buddhist Korea, which are almost as old as the Christian universities. But there's one that beats it all, and that's from about the year 500, which is easily the earliest university, started by Christians in Persia. And other things that we've done, libraries, literacy in the vernacular, which is a great story. And then Christian principles of education and just different kinds of knowledge. And then what might be Christian contribution to education now. In fact, what is being a Christian contribution to education now, which is very exciting, actually. Okay, now we go to healthcare. That's probably one of the easiest ones to describe. That obviously because Jesus was a healer, Christians from very early on have had sacraments of healing, people recognized as having gifts of healing, and had, stories of miracles for many, but they also started public hospitals. Pretty much as soon as Christians were legal enough to have any property at all, they started hospitals for the common good, not just for anybody. They weren't the first people to invent medicine. Every culture's had medicine. But hospitals for the common good is what one scholar calls the chief glory of Christianity, is that it's given the world hospitals. And then it asks again, can Christians contribute well to the world of medicine today? Includes nursing, mental hospitals, St. John's ambulance, medical missions, and so on. It's a fantastic, extraordinary story, all coming back to the healing story of the Good Samaritan. One little tiny text that has changed the world and the health of the world. It also does a little excursus into, what's the connection between spirituality and well-being, and it cites 1,500 scientific studies on those connections. So the old chestnut question, can prayer heal people, is a more complex question than just that. And those studies have explored that, what do we mean by healing, what do we mean by prayer? And there have been roughly 1,500 studies that I could track down. And so it cites those. That's part of the story. What's Christianity done for law? Again, there have been some fantastic contributions that Christians have done for law and human rights. People who say that our society is based on the Ten Commandments are wrong. Some of them are alive and well in our culture, but they haven't come just from the Ten Commandments. They've come through a consistent Judeo-Christian contribution to the development of law in the West and the East over centuries. and from persons and
back again.
persons and principles. It's a fantastic story, and I use the eradication of slavery as kind of the framework for that, and why it's important for us to be doing that again. Okay, so that's what's Christianity done for us. Going way back, Christian kind of war, but gee, the contribution has been, and still continues to be, pretty much human life, human rights, trade unions, prison reform, charity, the existence of charities, truth and reconciliation commissions, but then the four great corruptions of the church. Today, the cover-up of sexual abuse. And the sexual abuse was one thing, and a lot of people say, well, often are prepared to say, well, there's a bad apple in every batch. But the covering of it up is an unconscionable thing that the church will take with us into the future, as we have taken the Crusades and Inquisitions in US history. So can the law be good for the church, and can the church be good for the law? There we are. In this recent years, roughly over 70 Christian ministers have been arrested in various parts of Australia, objecting to the Australian government's rejection of refugee settlement.
I'm one of them.
There you go. Good on you, Ruth. I am so proud of you. I mean, I haven't been arrested yet. I hope it'll happen one day, but I also hope not.
It's a matter of opportunity.
But that's an awful lot more people who are opposing the law in that way than who are being arrested for the most heinous crimes against children and vulnerable people. And so I'm not keeping score here. I'm just saying that the confrontation with Christianity and the law is more than one-sided these days. And what Christianity has contributed to the law continues to be good and radical, even though there are also things for which we must apologise humbly, deeply and truly. We mustn't suddenly turn around with any of these apologies and what's Christianity done for us and say, oh, but really we're good. We have to just live with the fact that that the church is a contested space, but that when we do good, we are following Jesus. And when we do bad, we're protecting the reputation of the church. And that is not what Jesus stood for. Jesus was much more trusting than that. We've got to get back to being Jesus people. And where you see the good stuff happening, that is always the story. So the whole series invites anyone who's in it to become part of an incredible movement of people who love enough to do what Jesus said. Notice the word enough is a very important word there. Everyone has concern. Everybody says, I'll help my neighbour. But it just doesn't happen. To the degree that this story, what's Christianity ever done for us, demonstrates. So that's our story. As you can see, it's very content heavy. You've got to be fairly careful how you go forward with it. It's got 10 topics, but I wouldn't say they can be done in 10 weeks. I mean, you can do them in 10 weeks. So, for instance, pretty soon we'll be republishing this second section in such a way that you can just click on a link and you'll get a 15-minute talk from me, an edited talk, which pulls some of the bits out of this. A talk, it was recorded last year, and that'll give you some of the bits, and you can just have a discussion about that. And then the guide will have, and also, other things that you could do. So you can actually do them in a form which is not as rich as, the whole study as it exists.
Yeah.
What we're also finding now is that there's other people around the world are also doing this kind of work. So there'll be other resources coming online very soon.
That's good work, Ian.
Yeah.
Very useful.
Yep. It's a whole new form of apologetics too, because we can actually be both proud and humble about the track record of Christianity. What we've been doing is what